Hey, No Why listeners, I am really excited to share a book with you that I have been reading. It's from one of my favorite authors, and it's a book that just came out last week, and I've actually had it on pre-order for months. I've been reading through it, and it is so great because it relates to a lot of stuff that we've talked about on the Know Why podcast, and it offers insight that I think is so relevant for us right now, especially young adults, as we are trying to navigate this changing world of education, job markets, the way that AI is impacting work, and just trying to figure out what our purpose is in life. So the book is You Have a Calling, Finding Your Vocation in the True, Good, and Beautiful by Karen Swallow Prior. I'm going to be referencing it a lot, and let me just put a disclaimer right now. If you really want to understand what this book talks about, you need to read it for yourself because there's way too much wisdom for me to actually get into today. But I am going to give you some of my thoughts and some ways that I think this actually reinforces some of what we've talked about on the Know Why podcast before. I'm really hoping maybe that I can interview Dr. Pryor at some point in the future, either for Know Why or on Point of View. So hopefully can get that scheduled at some point in the future and talk with her in a little more depth about this book. But for now, again, I just want to point out some key takeaways that relate to a lot of what we've talked about on the Know Why podcast. It's a short book. And it's easy to read, but it's packed full of so much wisdom. And again, it's relevant today. And one of the reasons why I think it's relevant is because for a lot of Gen Z, there is concern about jobs and what do we do with our life? So there are a few reasons for this. As we've discussed, a lot of Gen Zers are really worried about AI taking their jobs. And what we are learning, what we're seeing from experts who are kind of looking into this, is that a lot of the white collar positions are at more risk of being taken over by AI than blue collar work or hands-on work or trade kinds of jobs. So this is interesting because it's coming on the heels of an era where really young adults were told that they had to get a bachelor's degree, that that was their ticket to success. In fact, we've been told that for so long that bachelor's degrees aren't even as valuable in the job market as they used to be. They don't really set people apart anymore because for more and more entry-level jobs, it's assumed that you have to have a bachelor's degree. So if you really want to attain that next level of success, or break through to the next level and really set yourself apart, then you have to have advanced degrees. Meanwhile, a lot of jobs have become, or a lot of degree plans have become a lot more tailored and narrow and specific. And this seemed like the practical way at a time because I know you've probably felt like this if you've taken college classes, or maybe you've heard these complaints of people saying, why do I have to take this, all these core credits before I can get to what I'm actually here to study that's actually related to my field? I don't need to take, American history because I had that when I was in grade school and I just need to focus on computer science or whatever I'm getting my degree in. And so what you've seen at a lot of universities is really a paring down of the core curriculum, and the original kind of intention or reasoning behind a classical liberal arts degree was to lay a broad foundation of knowledge that could be applicable in a wide array of endeavors as somebody moved on in the world. But you have seen more and more of kind of a very narrow focus on focusing on this specific track and this goal for this specific career that I am aiming toward. So it's interesting. While the price of college tuition has gone up, the actual value, I think, in having a bachelor's degree has gone down. And maybe that's not exactly right. But again, it's become a lot more common to have a bachelor's degree than it used to be. So it doesn't really set you apart as much as it used to. However, you're more likely to go into a lot of debt to get that bachelor's degree, even though wages aren't really increasing, salaries aren't increasing, so college tuition is increasing much faster. A lot of these degrees are becoming much more narrowly focused, and now you have people who are graduating and realizing that, oh, this thing that was unforeseen when I was planning my college career, back in high school, AI is taking my job. and I'm not actually able to work in this field that, I followed this plan, this path because I thought it was the path to success. And now a large language model is doing my job for me. So in some ways, figuring out your calling in life is more relevant than ever. And you would like to think, again, that you graduate high school, you go to college, you get your degree, you get a job in the field that you studied for, and then you're set. But as so many people are finding out, it often doesn't work that way. And even if you are blessed to have a job and you are getting your bills paid for, you may still feel, even into your 20s and 30s, or maybe even older, that is this really what I want to do? Is this my calling? Because as we discover, we can change so much as we age. And sometimes things don't really pan out the way that we thought they were going to. And so it's a really relevant question to say, what is my calling and how do I figure that out? And so again, that's why I wanted to highlight this book, because I think it does such a good job of giving some practical advice, but even more so helping us understand what all of that means. Because in our modern culture, it is so easy for us to conflate things that are actually completely different, to conflate job and career and passion with calling and vocation. And really all of those things have different definitions, which I want to kind of get into in a little bit. So again, the best way to fully absorb all of this wisdom and truth of this book, You Have a Calling, by Karen Swallow Prior, is to read it for yourself, and I highly recommend it. I'll put a link in the show notes. But let's highlight a few of the key takeaways. I will also mention that last year, I believe it was, we did a series on the Know Why podcast called How to or Know About Thriving at Work. And it covered a lot of the same ground. So I'm going to link to that as well. And I would definitely recommend checking out those episodes if you want to dive deeper into thriving at work and some of the specifics of that. So first, let's talk about a lie that is tackled in this book. And that is follow your passion. We've all heard that. It sounds like good advice because wouldn't we want to do what we enjoy? We probably also heard the saying like, find a way to get paid to do what you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. We've addressed this in more detail in another episode in our Thriving at Work series, so check that out. But basically, there are so many wrong assumptions in that because it assumes that work is bad, so you want to feel like you're not working, even though work is something that humans were made to do. It assumes that you have to be like super passionate about your job. It just gets so many things wrong. So one of the reasons why, as Prior notes in her book, that the maxim to follow your passion is bad is because it can actually lead to a lot of disillusionment and disappointment with everyday life. Because for most of history, getting paid to do what you loved was not the norm. And even today, most people aren't out there working jobs that they are absolutely passionate about. That's not the norm. Now, if that is how your life has turned out and you're able to do a job that you are truly passionate about and get paid for it, then that's great. You're super fortunate and you should be happy about that. But that's not necessarily realistic for everybody. And it typically doesn't work out like that, at least not in every single season of life. Here's another reason why I think that's a dangerous piece of advice is because it normalizes the pressure to monetize everything. And it motivates us to try to turn every hobby into a side hustle. Everything that we enjoy has to become a way for us to make money, especially in the era of social media and online influencers. It's like you can't even scroll through somebody talking about like sharing a hobby that they enjoy. If they get popular enough, eventually they're going to get opportunities to be a partner with something and then their content becomes ads. And it's just like, it's so ingrained in our society that we have to try to find a way to make money doing things that we love. So the author of the book talks about an example of a friend of hers who loved to bake, and she loved to share it with, friends and family. And everybody was always like, oh my gosh, you're so good at this. Like you should open up a bakery or you should sell your baked goods. But she just loved doing it. And I think we've all probably had friends where it was like, oh, you're so good at that. Like you could make money doing that. And that's where our mind automatically goes. Like you're good at this, you should sell it. And again, if you enjoy the hustle, if you are an entrepreneur at heart, then like that's okay. That can actually be something that you enjoy. Maybe you're passionate about starting businesses, but maybe somebody else isn't. And what's really dangerous is how this feeds into the lie that something has to make a paycheck to really be valuable or worth it or legit. And this can even factor into other kinds of work that are critical, not only for human survival, but human flourishing, that don't always get paid, like caretaking, like having children or caring for your elderly relative, or just being a good friend or a good neighbor or volunteering in the community. So many things in history have happened because people were so passionate about an issue and believed in it so much that they were volunteer movements that actually changed things. Those things are extremely valuable, but they weren't always paid for that work. But it came to define their lives. So again, we live in a society where everything has to be monetized. Or, as this is what I talked about in the last episode, everything needs to be shared online to feel like it's legitimate. Everything that we do for enjoyment, we tell ourselves, or maybe some subconscious part of us says it needs to be seen by a lot of people to be legitimate. But it's okay for something to just be a passion of yours that you love to do, and you don't sell it. You don't share it with very many people. You just do it for pure enjoyment and pure love of it. You don't have to be good at it. You can love to bake in the kitchen and not be the best baker in the world, but it brings you joy. Okay, so what? Then do it. You don't have to be the best at it to do it. And this is actually so freeing. So I really love that she focuses so much on passion in this book and what that really means, because we actually, when we try to conflate that with calling or with career, we dilute the meaning of both. And we can actually take something that is such a gift in life, which is having these things that we're passionate about and these hobbies or interests or pursuits. Those things are part of who we are as humans, and they're an important part of our life. But if we feel the need to make that our job or to try to earn a paycheck from it, then we kind of miss out on the beauty that it is, which is something that we enjoy that maybe is separate from making a paycheck. In fact, in our series that we did on thriving at work, one of the interviews was with somebody who did his doctoral dissertation on avoiding burnout. And one of the keys to avoiding burnout at work is to have a hobby that's unrelated to work, not something that you're doing to make money, but just for you, just to enjoy. That is so key for just balance in life as a human being. So anyways, don't conflate passion with something that you have to do to get paid for. And another interesting thing about passion, and this actually comes from research from Cal Newport, which is cited a lot in the book, is that people become more passionate over time about things that they become more skilled at. So our passions and our interests are actually kind of malleable. So while you don't have to turn something that is like a hobby, like just a passion for enjoyment, you don't have to turn that into a paycheck. You very well may become more passionate about your actual job over time just because of the work that you're investing into it and the skills that you're gaining there and the meaning that you're finding in that. And you can actually become more passionate. So sometimes passion follows skill, passion can follow calling, but skill and talent and calling don't always necessarily follow passion. They can overlap, but it's much more likely that you're going to become passionate about something that you're talented at or skilled at or called to than vice versa. And that's totally okay for those two things to be separate. But let's talk a little bit more about calling. Actually, before I move on to calling, I just want to mention this too. It can put so much pressure on young people or parents of little kids if they think that passion and interest is the key to figuring out what somebody should do in life. And I'm even thinking about this, both like remembering high school and thinking about for my own kids now. It's like there's just this culture to, you got to get them in music lessons or sports or whatever at age 4. That way they can, by the time they're in high school, they can get a scholarship and then they can go to college and they can have that focus. And then when they graduate, they can have that career. And it's like, again, it doesn't really give room for people to change and grow and figure things out. And so if you're telling a 15-year-old that they have to figure out what they want to do for the rest of their life and make sure that, they're locked into that. That can be just really scary. And again, actually kind of limiting, rather than the freedom that comes with realizing, like, I don't have to have a dream job in order to have a happy life. I don't have to turn everything that I'm interested in or passionate about or every extracurricular or hobby into something that makes money. That can just relieve a lot of pressure off of youth and off of parents too. But anyway, let's go back to calling, okay? Again, I'll say it for like the 10th time. Really read the book. I really recommend it to understand more of just the philosophical and theological background here that Karen Swallow Prior does such a good job of explaining in terms that are easy to understand. But there are a few principles that I want to highlight that I just thought were really helpful. A call, for one, is something that comes from outside. So that kind of sounds basic when you think about it, but there has to be a caller and somebody to answer the call. And a passion is something that's more internal. It comes from inside. And that's another reason why your passion or like your interests or your hobby shouldn't necessarily be a compass pointing you to what your calling is in life. Your calling is something that's going to come from outside. Even people who aren't Christians have kind of acknowledged that, like, there is something divine about vocation, about a call from, maybe they would say, the universe or something, to pursue a particular path. And from the Christian perspective, we would say that that's God's unique purpose for your life. So it comes from outside. Sometimes it can take a long time to realize what that calling is. Sometimes it's something that you actually realize in retrospect, and that's okay. But we do want to try to understand what it is, right? So even if we realize we may have to be patient, then there are some things that can kind of help us maybe figure that out or point us to that in some helpful ways. And again, a reminder, your calling can be related or completely unrelated to your day job. So work in itself is not a bad thing. As the author points out, in a season of life, somebody's calling may be to just have a stable job so that they can actually provide for their family. So that might be a calling. It may have nothing to do with what you're actually doing at your day job. It may have everything to do with what you're doing at your job. It depends on the person. But realizing that job and career and calling aren't necessarily the same thing, that's also really helpful. So another thing I wanted to highlight that the author points out in her book is actually, she references Elizabeth Gilbert, who is the author of Eat, Pray, Love. And Elizabeth Gilbert has 4 categories for kind of breaking down these different things that we can easily conflate if we're not careful. And those are hobby, job, career, and vocation. So hobby, again, like, think of that as your passion, something that you enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be something you make money at. A job is temporary. It can turn into a career, but it may not. It may be a stepping stone, or it may just be, I have to do this right now just to pay the bills, but it's not something I'm going to focus on. Obviously, a career is when a job turns into something that's long-term, that you are pursuing more. Something that may be a job for one person can turn into a career for another person, and vice versa. But then you also have vocation, or what we might call calling. And so again, Gilbert uses the example of writing. She got paid for writing jobs throughout her life. Eventually she became a published author. But even before all of that, writing was something that she always did, that she was called to do, whether or not she was getting paid for it at that moment in time. So I thought that breakdown was pretty helpful. Here are a few other principles about calling. Again, think of calling as something different than passion. Passion can follow calling, but a passion comes from inside of you. Sometimes it's like a hobby, and it's something that it's just for you to enjoy life. A calling is going to involve serving your neighbor in some way. So a calling is meant to be shared. It is meant to impact other people. And this goes into the principle that we've talked about a lot in the summer series of how interconnected we are as humans, how we are relational in nature because we were created in the image of God. And so if we understand ourselves as part of a community, or in a Christian understanding, part of the body of Christ, then we're all going to have different parts to play and different roles. And so our calling is going to be something that contributes to the broader community, to the broader human family in some way. And the calling also is likely something that will involve your talents and skills. A lot of people can feel pressured, and especially I think in some Christian circles, like if you were like me and you were raised in like the evangelical culture in like the early 2000s, then you may have felt pressure to like not say, I'm not good at something. Like, don't say that because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, don't say that you're bad at math. Well, first of all, it's really easy to take Philippians 4:13 out of context. And if we are meant to function as a community, as the body of Christ, then like it's okay if I'm not good at everything. That doesn't mean I need to give up. Like in high school, yeah, I need to pass my math class, but maybe I'm not going to become a doctor because maybe it would be really disastrous if I did. You want somebody who's skilled in the kind of things you have to understand to be a doctor. But there are other things that I am really good at. So it's okay to acknowledge your limitations and acknowledge that's part of the beauty of being human is that we all have different things, different parts to play. And then when we are together, as we're meant to be in relationship and in community, it all fits together and we all play our part and we all serve each other in that way. So your calling likely will involve something that you are naturally gifted at or maybe skilled at. Another principle that it's important to remember when it comes to calling is that sometimes your settings may change while your calling remains the same. Maybe you're a really gifted teacher, and that could involve actually like teaching at a school, or it could involve like just raising your own kids and teaching them. Whether or not you're technically homeschooling, being a parent involves a lot of teaching. And so maybe that's something you do in a certain season. Maybe it's not at a school at all. Maybe it's in your current job. And you do a really good job with training other people. So you train the new employees and you do the training courses and things like that because you're called to teach. Maybe when you retire, you are, or in your off time, you volunteer as a Sunday school teacher, or you teach, community classes at the rec center in your city. There are all kinds of ways that you might use your calling that are separate from the official job title you're holding in that season. And I thought that it was really helpful to understand it that way. And another thing, and this is where there's a lot of personal conviction here, Pryor points out that sometimes pursuing your calling means saying no. And this is a problem that I have because I think this is something, again, that's common in our culture. We have FOMO, we have fear of missing out, and that includes fear of missing out on an opportunity. And I think for me, in my life, just because of my personality, I've been so focused on figuring out what I'm supposed to do that it feels like I should say yes to every opportunity because what if I miss the thing that's going to lead me to my actual calling in life? And I think you even probably hear sometimes self-help gurus or people who are all about the hustle and everything. It's like, always say yes, never say no to an opportunity because you got to grow and you got to get all that experience. But saying yes, as this book points out, to something that's not meant for you can actually start leading you down a path that leads you further away from your calling. And so this is something that I'm having to learn is how to say no. Something may be objectively good, but it may not be good for me. It may not be what God has for me. It may not be my calling. And saying yes to it could distract me from the thing that He actually wants me to do. And so I think that it's helpful. And one of the things that she writes is sometimes we aren't called to the things we wish we were called to. And that can sting a little bit. But again, it's knowing our limitations and realizing okay, maybe I shouldn't be pursuing this. Maybe that's not actually what I'm called to do. And that actually gives you some freedom to say no and not feel guilty about having to say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. And people aren't always going to understand that because again, it's like, why not make money doing that? Why not take that promotion? Why not take that job offer? That would be so good for you. You would get so much recognition. You would promote. You'd make more money. Things that make sense to people on the outside may not always be right for what our calling is. And it is okay to acknowledge that and to walk in that truth. So I I'm still kind of applying this to my own life, but some of the takeaways I took from it that I'm going to apply personally, I think might be helpful for you too. And so one is looking at your life, both kind of like current situation and maybe where you've been in the past, where you think you might want to go. And you may not get it right the first time, but look at those 4 categories from Elizabeth Gilbert: hobby, job, career, vocation. And think about the different things that you do for work, or just your passions, your enjoyment, your interest, and try to maybe categorize those. Because again, we can easily conflate all of them, and it might be helpful to lay it out like that and realize, okay, I don't have to make this a career. Maybe this is just my hobby. Maybe this was just my job I was doing for a while, but it's okay to let that go and leave that in the past. Things like that. Another thing that she recommends: ask others who love you, who know you well, and who you trust to tell you what they see in you. Sometimes we're not really good at knowing what we're good at, but somebody else, like a best friend or a parent or a spouse or a mentor, they can actually see things in us that we can't see. And again, it doesn't have to be a job title like I see you and I think nurse. It can be you're really good at nurturing. You're really good at anticipating others' needs. You're a really good organizer. You are a really good encourager. Those things like that, there may not be like a job title clearly attached to that, but that can still give us a sense of what our calling might be in various circumstances throughout our life. So it can be helpful. So ask people who know you and who you trust what they see in you. And again, write down those things that maybe you feel like you wish you were called to, and do some soul searching to say, maybe I'm not actually called to that. So that's the one that might be a little bit tricky, but it can also help us to kind of cut down the things that we're chasing in life that maybe aren't for us. So there is a lot more I could continue on with, but I think I'll leave it there. And again, my recommendation is to get this book. My review is 5 stars. It's great. And I think it's really relevant right now just because of where a lot of people are and trying to figure out what to do with their life. And it points to so many of the truths that we have consistently highlighted on the Know Why podcast about what we were made for as human beings and what actually leads to fulfillment and flourishing and satisfaction in life. So again, this is You Have a Calling, Finding Your Vocation in the True, Good, and Beautiful by Karen Swallow Prior. I'll link it here. I'll link the other episodes that I've referenced on the Know Why podcast, as well as some other articles that may be helpful for you as you think about this. But anyway,